everyone, and welcome back to Mission Success Women in Multifamily, MHN's monthly podcast series spotlighting extraordinary women shaping the future of the industry. I'm Senior Editor Laura Valean, and today I'm happy to be joined by Christine Gilmore, Vice President of Learning and Development at Bell Partners. Christine has been with Bell for 15 years, and under her leadership, the company has achieved significant reductions in turnover while building a strong, consistent culture across teams. So in this episode, we'll be breaking down what really drives retention, because multifamily right now isn't just about attracting talent, it's about keeping your best people. So what does it actually take to build a workplace where high performers choose to stay and grow? Christine will answer this question and many others over the next few minutes. Hi, Christine. Welcome to the podcast.
How are you?
All good. How are you?
Great. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Let's start with a big question. We've all noticed that employee retention has become a big challenge in multifamily. And I'm curious from your perspective, why is it especially difficult nowadays to retain top performers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the reasons is that our population that we are targeting in our industry, one of the biggest things reasons why people leave companies is because of growth opportunities. And, if you think about multifamily and especially for on-site, it's a small staff. So there's not a ton of upward mobility. And I think you have to get really creative in ways to still grow and develop people, which maybe isn't a new title. I think that's one reason. I think other reasons are, with so many opportunities being remote now, it now changes your competition from being the property across town to other industries,
wherever,
working from wherever. So it just makes it even more competitive and even more important that we're doing what we need to do to bring in the right people and keep them.
Mm-hmm. There's also a very common belief that people leave primarily for higher pay.
Right.
In your experience, what actually makes high-performing employees stay?
Absolutely comes down to their supervisor, whoever their direct manager is. And whether it is, and some of the top reasons why people are leaving today are things like growth opportunities, burnout,
That's
some
a
things
big
like
one
that.
nowadays.
Yeah,
Burnout.
for sure. Yeah. And, in terms of, consistency, communication, and whether or not they leave specifically because they don't like to work for that manager, the manager has an impact on all of those other reasons too. So that might be that not the key driver, but I would say, out there, if you've got a great supervisor, when you're not going to be out looking for jobs, or a recruiter calls you, you may not answer. You may say, I'm happy. But if you're on the fence about them, then you're going to start to look for more opportunities.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
When did Bell Partners realize turnover needed to be addressed in a fundamentally different way? What triggered that shift?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was triggered, and I know that people use this all the time, but from COVID. And
it was a big game changer. Yeah.
Yes, COVID was a huge changer in terms of the work environment. And that's when all of the remote positions opened up. That's when it made it challenge. Our folks on site were, essential employees, so they needed to be there through that, and their schedules were, adjusted and different, and it just made work a little bit more challenging. And then afterwards, some people were, well, I want to go remote, or I want to look at a different opportunity because I realized that maybe, this isn't for me. And so we really struggled after COVID in terms of, filling positions and finding the right people. And so that's when we decided to really take a look at what was happening with turnover and really digging into the data around it and coming up with a new way of onboarding and bringing in new people.
Mm-hmm. And what did the data show you? I mean, what did you find out? Was there anything surprising that you found out back
Yeah,
then?
when we started to look at the data, we broke down turnover by length of time with the company. So first 90
Mm-hmm.
days, for 6 months, first year, and that's when the turnover was the highest. So if you can
Okay.
get them to be here for a year, you're a lot more likely to keep them even longer term. And so we really focused on especially that first 90 days because that was the highest turnover percentage. And so once we saw the numbers, we started to dig into, things like exit interviews. Why are people leaving? We also did calls with people to say,
Okay.
hey, you've only been here for 60 days. Tell us about your first week on the job. And we were finding out that, community managers were starting and somebody just handed them the keys and said, go.
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. And we were like, that is not right. And we didn't want to stop to that. So that's when we started to really focus on what could we do to make our onboarding experience something that when people come in, they know what's expected. They can, go through onboarding and come out the other side feeling very confident in what they're doing. Because I think a lot of times with new people, they get thrown in there and then, we all want to do a good job. And if they don't feel like they were given the tools or the training to do a good job, then, they start to wonder, well, is this the right place for me? I always say that when if you think about your very first day at work or the night before, you're so excited, you have this new job, you're so excited, but you're a little bit nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say that that first day can either take that excitement and turn it into something great, or it can squish it. And
Right.
they start thinking, did I make the right choice?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I actually know that Bell saw a significant reduction in early turnover after strengthening that onboarding process. What
Yep.
does effective onboarding really look like at
Mhm.
scale for such a big company? And why do so many companies underestimate its impact?
Yeah. I think a little bit of reasons why they underestimate it is they feel like, oh, well, this person, maybe they have multifamily experience, so they shouldn't really need a lot of training. We can just bring them in. And oh, by the way, I'm the community manager that's now worked 7 days in a row because I need to fill this position. So I wanted to take a day off and I want them to
Yeah.
start. But in terms of some of the things that we found are most important is when people ask me how many people we have on the learning and development team, and I say, well, we have 8 plus plus. And they're like, what does plus plus mean? And I really look at, especially onboarding, it is a team event, that it is not up to the learning and development team. You have to involve the manager. You have to involve the other teammates on site because they want that person to be just as successful as they want to be.
Of course.
If you're a teammate and your person that you're working with doesn't know what they're doing or can't do their job, that's a lot more stress on you. So getting
Mm-hmm.
them to buy in that they're all part of this process and really making day one feel special and welcoming. And then really what we do is the first week, they're in onboarding. Pretend that you have not hired them yet. They're focused on onboarding. And our program is made up of, virtual sessions with learning and development. It's made up of online courses. It has checklists. It's got activities. And then it's got checklists that involve other teammates on the property. And then we also, and I say plus plus because the first plus is we have a program where we have community managers, maintenance managers, and regional managers who are new hire mentors for people in the same
Mm-hmm.
position. So I'm a new community manager. I get paired with another community manager who is trained to be what we call Bell Buddies. And
Mm-hmm.
that person, I can call them if I have a question and maybe I don't feel comfortable asking my manager. And they're really kind of help guide me after that first week in particular. The first week is very structured. They get a checklist every day of here's what you need to do, these courses, join this online session, do this activity. And then we do a check-in with them at the end of each day, the learning and development team, to see how it's going, making sure they have what they need. And so that
Mm-hmm.
helps us scale wise. We have 170 Bell Buddies, so community,
Wow.
regional, and maintenance managers. So that's like my first plus. And then my second plus is the rest of the on-site team. Because you
Mm-hmm.
can't, with a learning and development team of 8 and a population of over 2,000, we can't make sure the experience is great for every single person.
Of course, of course. You mentioned a few minutes ago at the beginning of our conversation that retention has a lot to do with someone's direct manager. How much of retention ultimately comes down to the direct manager, and what are the most common leadership gaps you see when someone is promoted into a management role?
Yeah. I would say probably 50% of the people leave specifically because of their manager.
That's a lot.
I don't like my manager, but I would say up to probably 85 or 90% if it's my manager has something to do with it, but I also don't have the growth opportunities or I'm burned out. All those things that, like I was talking earlier, that the manager directly has an impact on. And so I think in terms of management sort of gaps, one, in addition to the regular population of associates for turnover, there's high turnover in managers. And one statistic I saw one time is that when you bring in a new manager, it impacts the team negatively for up to 3 quarters. So almost an entire year. Because if you think about it, they have to get to know that person, their style, that person has to get acclimated. And, and sometimes, when a new person comes in, you see turnover because maybe they don't feel like the person's the right fit. And, so I think that is one factor. But then I think too, because turnover is high, they come in with not quite as many skills as maybe in the past. And sometimes, again, they get thrown in there. They haven't had any, leadership development. Some people, one article I was reading was saying that most managers did not attend a formal leadership development program until they were 35 years old. And if I think about,
they just landed that job and tried to, I don't know, do their best. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're kind of learning by trial and error on your people. So
not ideal.
No.
Which is why I know you have a leadership excellence program.
We do.
That actually spans 3 years, which is a lot. This means long-term development rather than one-off training. Why is that so critical in creating consistency and ultimately loyalty?
Yeah. One, I think, is that because it's 3 levels, we continue to grow with the person. And all of our officers in the company have been through the leadership program. So because they have, it's easy for them to help develop and coach their own people. They know what we're looking for. They know what it takes to be a Bell leader. We feel like that when a new manager's hired, they need 6 to 9 months just to get acclimated into the culture, the Bell world, the systems, the processes. So we really don't do a lot of leadership training other than the things you need to know. But once they hit that 6 to 9 months, we do a foundational management program. We want everybody to be a consistent leader, same level, so whether you come in with experience or not, we want everyone to have that foundation. And then we build on the foundation through the next 2 levels. And, I look at it as one, people need to be refreshed and reminded and renewed about leadership practices. We all know that there's some things that we know we're supposed to do, but we just get in the habit of not doing it. Also, what leaders are required skill-wise changes, based on the workforce changes or the competition changes or just the work environment in general. So, if empathy might be, a skill that needs to be built now where, 5 years ago, maybe it wasn't quite as important. So we're always looking at what are the leadership skills that people are going to need in the next few years. And also, how does that link to the company strategy? So if our strategy is changing, what leadership skills do we need to make that strategy effective? So at least everyone's going to sort of continue to develop.
Right. In that context, how do you connect those learning initiatives to measurable business outcomes? Is it difficult to do that?
It's definitely not easy. one of the things that I learned along the way is to make sure when you get started setting out on creating a program that you get your metrics in order and what success looks like out of first. Because it's very hard to go, oh, we put that program in and everyone says it's working, but really is it? And so if you don't think about that ahead of time, then it makes it more difficult to measure in the end. And so, you need to look at, what problem are you trying to solve, or what behavior are you trying to change? And what are some of the success metrics related to that changing behavior or relating to helping with that problem? So whether it is, a lot of times we focus on turnover, we focus on internal promotions, we focus on just the talent pool overall and how they're being rated in performance reviews and things like that. We focus on, resident satisfaction scores, before and after, or in our sales programs, we'll focus on, what is our leasing and closing before and after. Maintenance, it's around work orders and how quickly or how many times they have to return for work orders. So, I think the biggest important thing that I learned is you've got to think about that stuff before you get started on writing the training.
Right. But besides those leadership roles and executive roles and I don't know, roles that are in management, basically, there are other roles that are notoriously hard to retain across the industry, the ones in maintenance, obviously.
Yes.
What did you discover when you introduced structured, personalized training for maintenance teams?
Yes, they love it. And I think one of the goals that we had when we set out to create that training was because the competition is so hard to find maintenance technicians and to retain them, is we wanted to go under the philosophy of, let's start hiring maintenance for their work ethic, for their sense of responsibility, some of those things that are not easy to train. We'll train them on electrical or appliances or things like that. And so we went into that with that mindset and said, okay, how do we make sure that everyone can have an opportunity to learn these different areas? But we also knew that we were going to have some people that came in and maybe some of the areas they were experts in. And if they're sitting through training and they're an electrician and they're sitting through electrical basic training, they're going to be, well, why, what am I doing here? So we created a test out first. So they take an exam, and then based on the results, it tells them what training they need to take. So they're only taking what they actually need. Some people have to take almost all of it. Some people have to take very little bit of it. And so I think that has helped us a lot in terms of being able to open the pool of people and find the right fit for the culture and for the team, and then train on the more technical skills that are easier to train on. And, one of the stats that I think is incredible is when we first rolled out our maintenance program. Well, first of all, today, at the end of 2025, 86% of our maintenance managers and technicians are what we call Bell certified maintenance technicians. But one of the interesting things is the first year we rolled out the program, we did some data around participation in the program versus not. And technicians who participated in the program, their turnover was 28%. For those technicians who did not participate in the program, their turnover was 72%. So it
huge
really
difference
helps, for sure.
Yeah. Let's zoom out a bit, Christine.
Yeah, sure.
You've been with Bell for 15 years or maybe more now. That's a remarkable thing. What has changed most in what employees expect from their workplace over that time? What have you seen, and what's your feeling about this?
Yeah. I think part of it, so what I have seen changed in particular related to learning and development, retention, and things like that is, one, there's a lot more focus on growth and opportunities. People come in and they're here for 3 months and it's like, what can I do next? You know, and they're ready to learn something new. They want to, you know, grow, and it doesn't have to be just up. It's, you know, it could be across, it could be learning a new tool. It could be, you know, and like our Bell Buddy program is great for that because we've got a lot of CMs who've been in their roles for a long time. And it's a great way to keep them engaged and develop them because now they have to teach somebody else. And then I also, you know, with things like YouTube and TikTok and all that, people's attention spans have continued to decrease and decrease. And if you don't catch their attention in the first 5 seconds, then you're not going to.
You lost them.
Yes, yes. So that's a big one. I think people are just, it's almost like after COVID, everyone is so much more stressed out in the world. And so the customers that you're dealing with and the residents are more stressed out. And so I feel like people, it makes it more stressful for you because you're dealing with people who are, you know, not in a great place or stressed. And so that makes it even more challenging. So focusing on things like, how do you handle conflict? How do you handle, you know, a resident who is unhappy? How do you handle conflict within your team? You know, and then managing stress and burnout and things like that, where I think, you know, when I first started, that wasn't even thought about.
It sounds like training those soft skills is almost as important as training those technical skills, you know?
Right. Absolutely. Totally agree.
One last question, Christine. If, let's say, for example, a mid-sized multifamily operator listening or watching this podcast wants to reduce turnover this year, what's the first step they should take, and what's one mistake they should avoid?
Okay. I would say the first step is to really dig into your turnover to see what's causing it or where the trends are. You know, is it first 90 days? Is it in a specific role? To really dig in and look at what you're trying to solve for instead of just doing a blanket, we're going to do something to reduce turnover. I think that's the number one thing. And then once you look at the data, I think you've got to dig into more of the qualitative, whether it is doing focus groups or phone calls with people or exit, you know, a lot of exit interview data is not all that great. So I found that when we were looking at the onboarding program, calling people and saying, hey, what was your experience like? They were honest, you know, and that helped a ton. So I think getting started on trying to figure out what you're trying to solve. And then I also think the other big win is if you can get everyone to realize how important their role is in helping new people get started and get up to speed, whether it is the teammates, the manager, you know, corporate support departments, things like that. And then once you do, you have to focus on providing really easy access tools for them to use that isn't, you know, a document with 17 Excel tabs. It's something really simple. So for us in onboarding, not only do we have a daily checklist for the new hire, the hiring manager has a checklist of, you know, make sure you review these things with your person today, and then make sure you get these things done with that person. So I think to me, those are some of the biggest things. And I think that I would say mistakes along the way is it's a big change. So trying to implement something like that, you can't leave out the change management piece of it, and sharing with people why this is important. And then I also have found that you have to get every level of leadership to buy into it, because they help you drive that change. So, you know, like in our onboarding, we said that you can only bring people in on onboarding weeks. You can't have a higher start on a non-onboarding week, which was a struggle at first because we're like, but I need this person. But because we had the support of the regional managers, then, you know, they convinced them that yes, you need them, but it's better to wait because you're going to get them ramped up even faster.
Right. Right. Thank you so much, Christine, for joining me and for sharing such valuable insights.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who tuned in to this episode of Mission Success Women in Multifamily. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow the Lease Up on your favorite podcast platform. That's where you'll find all of Multi-Housing News' podcast series, including Mission Success. Thanks again for listening and watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.